When I started, the business model between networks and television stations were, we'll give you our network programming station and thank you for airing it, so we'll give you some money.
Right.
And then at some point, the demand started shifting, and then the network said, hey, TV station, we're going to give you that programming, but we can't afford to give you money anymore. It's too expensive to make programming. It's getting competitive. A very pivotal, fortuitous time in my life. It was early 80. One of my mentors, who was actually one of the news leaders in LA, became a first-time general manager in my hometown, Chicago. He handpicked me back to be a sales leader. And so I was lucky enough to come home and get that promotion and do that job. And then he did something even better for me. He hired Oprah Winfrey. We watched that develop from obscurity to a phenomenon.
Hey folks, welcome back to On the Home Front. I'm your host, Jeff Duden, and today we've got a legend in the broadcasting world. 40 years. You know him as the man who was on the team that hired Oprah Winfrey and who showed Jerry Springer and Howard Stern the door in Chicago. A true titan in the broadcasting world, Larry Wert. We're taking a dive into Larry's incredible journey from his humble beginnings in radio to his influential roles at ABC, NBC, and beyond, all the way to his current status as an entrepreneur. But that's not all. We're also tackling a burning question. How do we navigate the ever-evolving media landscape while avoiding the pitfalls of sensationalism and misinformation? Larry's got the goods and the insights and advice you need to stay ahead of the game and make a smart media choices. If you like what you hear today, leave a like, comment, or subscribe to see all the content we have coming your way. And if you have any questions regarding business, franchising, or just about the show, use the links in the description and we'll get right back to you. Thanks for listening. Welcome, everybody. This is Jeff Duden, and we are on the home front. And today we are with Larry Wert, who has had an esteemed career in media and broadcasting in the Chicagoland area and parts unknown. Welcome, Larry.
Hey, good morning, Jeff. Maybe
it's nice
it wasn't esteemed, but maybe it was just plain steamed.
Well, we'll let the listeners be the judge of that. Well, it was great. I got to meet you at an event where we were looking at, it was an investment event for an NBA team. And we quickly figured out we were both Chicagoland people and decided, based on our conversation, to have you on the home front. So really appreciate you being on this morning.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. I really enjoyed meeting you and learning about your journey a bit. And so it's fun to be here with you this morning.
Awesome. Larry, did you grow up in Chicago?
I did. I grew up in a town called Riverside on the west side, and I went to a place called Fenwick High School in Oak Park, and worked my way to the University of Wisconsin on an athletic scholarship. I was a diver. I always was into aquatics in my youth. Helped me get my first job. I put aquatics director in my experience background, and they said, what would that be? And I said, it's a lifeguard, basically. It's just a cooler name. But I competed at Wisconsin, and while I was there, I had aspirations to represent our country and compete. And then I went to the Olympic trials, and I saw Greg Louganis, and I decided I had to get a job.
Right.
So that a little pivot. I was lucky enough to get my first job at a Chicago ad agency called Leo Burnett. And before all the consolidation in the industry, and that was kind of the eighth or ninth inning of Mad Men, what a wonderful place to start. And they were one of the biggies. While I was there, I met so many people who were on the sales side of broadcasting, selling commercial time. And they all told me that I was miscast in my job and that I really should be doing that. So I was lucky enough to get an opportunity on the West Coast with ABC television on my first sales job. And there was only 3 networks then. There was no cable. There was no internet. There was not even a Fox. I mean, it was 3 networks, some radio, and a bunch of newspapers. That was media. That was the media landscape. And it was very memorable times. The morning show on our TV station was hosted by Regis Philbin. Locally in LA.
That's right.
What a blast. My first 5 years and exposure to Hollywood and television and sales business. And
Larry, I don't want to get past this point without asking you what your best dives were.
I guess I was considered strong, but not pretty. I didn't have the
Okay.
world's greatest alignment and toe point, but I was,
I can resonate with strong but not pretty.
I competed pretty well, and I could do harder degree of difficulty than many to overcome my lack of form and beauty. And so I was using a 3.5 somersault and, inward 2.5, 1 meter. I enjoyed twisting, backward and reverse twisting. So I was really more comfortable with the higher degree of difficulty optionals than I was, simple front dives.
And that's off the low springboard.
I competed on 1 meter, 3 meter, and a little 10 meter, and
Okay.
loved it. In the Big Ten back then, they had the dominant coaches. Actually, Greg Louganis' coach defected from Ohio State to go coach him in California. If you were, fifth in the Big Ten, you were about, seventh or eighth in the world. The Chinese weren't doing it yet. There was always a great Italian and a great Mexican diver. But it was wonderful to compete, then and just have that experience along with, my overall college experience.
That's fantastic. And then you moved, you got into media, which very fortuitous. I mean, media has just exploded in ways that you probably couldn't foresee back in the day. I mean, before the internet, really. I mean, it's just the evolution of where we get our content and the impact that it has on us. It's I'd love to unpack your thoughts on what's going on currently a little bit later. But so you moved out to LA, or were you on the West Coast for this job?
Yes, I did. I did my first 5 years out there, came back to Chicago for a stint, and then I ended up in New York. It was a time where the three big networks kind of dominated media consumption, and people had to make an appointment to watch the programming they wanted. They wanted to get their daily news. They had to go watch when it was available, a couple, 3 times a day, and that was it. They wanted their entertainment programs. They had to make an appointment. Pretty soon, technology started rearing its head, and you had recorders, right? You had the ability to put a cassette recorder in and tape a show so you could watch it when you wanted. And then really, the advent of technology kept coming. And technology eventually made it easy to record your programming right on your set top box. And then more programming outlets started proliferating. Actually, the ESPN was one of the early cable frontiers and came in quietly with a different business model. It wasn't reliant on advertising like we were. It was reliant on subscription fees from people who were starting to buy cable. And obviously there was fewer limits on cable station capability. So, there might have been in any given market, 5, 6, 7 TV stations, but soon there was 10, 20, 100, 400 cable channels. And this was all before the internet started rearing, popping, and which became another media platform. But as we all recall, our first experience with it was more of a dial-up to communicate with people in chat rooms, and the bandwidth just didn't allow content to be transferred in any reasonable time. Right? There just wasn't enough capacity at that time. So all of this happened, I'd say, through the 80s, and by the time we're in the 90s, you just can see a different landscape developing, a media landscape. So in big summary, you have technology, which started immediately changing consumer behavior, and consumers started, instead of having to make an appointment, they were having their own programming to themselves. That was a big deal. When I started, the business model between networks and television stations were, we'll give you our network programming station, and thank you for airing it, so we'll give you some money.
Right.
And then at some point, the demand started shifting, and then the network said, hey, TV station, we're going to give you that programming, but we can't afford to give you money anymore. It's too expensive to make programming, and it's getting competitive.
So
And
are
then-
you saying the content creators were paying to have their content put on the television stations?
Yes.
And the networks, so the television stations were, my wife was in media. She worked for like Trumper Communications. And then over the course of maybe in Charlotte, and then maybe over the course of 10 years, I think it was bought by somebody else, then ultimately gobbled up by Clear Channel.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is, and also pick this up from the Bob. Who's the guy that did the Happy Little paintings? Bob Ross. So it's
okay.
Bob Ross. I also picked this up from the Bob Ross documentary. So, but it was, most of these television stations were locally owned and operated. So they had control of the airwaves. Is that correct?
It's true. Thousands in the country, and the networks each owned a few of their own. Give it 5, 10, or 15 in each market, the big markets, because they wanted to have some access to programming locally as well. So they always had a relationship between networks and then owning some stations. But you're right. That was the relationship back then with networks and stations and how programming got disseminated.
Yeah, and I've met several people that we've had in our Homefront Brands franchise owned radio stations in the Triad area, Raleigh-Durham area. That's what their family did for 30 or 40 years. And of course, they got an offer they couldn't refuse. The local family business that owned the radio station here and the television stations. And so really interesting that access was what had value inside of that versus the content, where now it's really shifted to where content is king and it finds every avenue possible. And you can get it there's so many ways to get content and new ways coming out every day. I can only imagine and we've seen the impact in the newspaper industry. We've seen the impact in network television. We've seen the impact in ESPN. Where an upstart like Barstool Sports can come out and just absolutely crush.
Yeah, it's such an amazing sea change when you think about what it was and what it is and where it's still headed, because audience fragmentation and choice is still, I think, expanding sideways. And
who'd you work for in New York? In New York, who'd you work for?
I worked
NBC?
for ABC, the network.
Okay.
And then another time I worked for Tribune Media. When I worked for ABC, in the 1986, that was the first media acquisition of any size and any notable nature. A small company called Capital Cities came in and borrowed a few $1 billion from Warren Buffett, and they bought ABC for $3.5 billion. 1986, and I believe they sold it to Disney 10 years later for $18.7 billion. So once Warren Buffett had some vision and made a good investment there. But
yeah, you think I think now it might not be popular, but I think Warren Buffett one day will be very successful.
You think?
I think.
Well, the success is relative, Dan. Jeff.
I wish he was my relative.
I think I do too. Although he doesn't give a lot of money to his relatives. Remember?
Why would he? You'll ruin him forever.
That's what he said. But you brought up Trumper. So I just had a communication with Jeff Trump. I mean, some of the pioneers in this business are, they're still around. And when we reflect on what was and what is, it's mind blowing.
Yeah, absolutely. So how'd you get back to Chicago?
So a very pivotal, fortuitous time in my life. It was early 80 and interest rates were about 22%, just got married and just got pregnant. And one of my mentors, who was actually one of the news leaders in LA, when I met in those earlier years, became a first-time general manager in my hometown, Chicago. And he handpicked me back to be a sales leader. And so I was lucky enough to come home and get that promotion and do that job. And then he did something even better for me. He hired Oprah Winfrey. I was in the room I was around. But a guy named Dennis Swanson gets full credit. A lot of people, take credit, but we watched that develop from obscurity to a phenomenon.
So what did you see, and what did your team see in Oprah Winfrey that led you to take a chance on her?
It's funny you say that. Before she was selected, we had a room with piles of DVD tapes of applicants to be the morning show host in Chicago only. Okay. And everyone in the room at some point voted, and most people voted for someone else. But Dennis Swanson, I remember him saying, I have a feeling about this one. And Oprah was in Baltimore. She was a kind of a not very high-profile TV host. She looked pretty atypical to what you might see in a morning host position in a market like Chicago. And he, after seeing her tapes and meeting with her, he felt she had a unique quality that might resonate. He was spot on, because her ability to connect with people in an authentic way that gave credibility to that communication was just amazing. And some people say, could that have happened today in this environment with all this media? I don't know, but it was a vertical climb to call it overall national audience acceptance.
Now she was in The Color Purple, right? And was that had she been acting at that point, or was this basically the very beginning of her career?
It all came off of her, local Chicago television show. Yeah. And about 10 or 12 months into it, a syndicator named Roger King and his brother Michael, the King brothers, they owned, I think they owned the Little Rascals, and they just had a feeling. So they came to our station and Mr. Swanson, and they said, we'd like to syndicate Oprah. And, he said, what's in it for us? And they gave him a deal for Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy, because they were just acquiring that. Anyway, that was the deal. It actually, until Oprah retired, that was the deal, 28 years. Those are the most.
She is basking in a as Jerry Seinfeld said, he's living in a dream world of residuals.
Gosh, she did very well. So did the people around her, and yeah, she that was a remarkable phenom. But it was neat to be there at that time, and then the acquisition of ABC was also an interesting culture change, and you could see things were starting to really change. And I was approached by a radio station in Chicago at the time, and they were actually my client. And they said, look, we're going to acquire a station in LA. And the general manager said, would you go back there? And now I was a sales manager, and he's offering me a general manager position, but I would have had to go back to LA. So in a short order, after 10 years with ABC and a little bit of stock equity, and my career was going fine, that was a moment where the idea of going back to LA didn't sit well at home. So they said, okay, what if you take Chicago and I go to LA? And that's what happened. It was a small company called Evergreen Media. The station here was called The Loop. And the irony is that small little team in the acquisition of LA under a guy by the name of Jim DeCastro became the country's largest local radio company.
All right, was that Steve Dahl? Was that Steve Dahl? Was that Jonathan Brandmeier? Who was all on The Loop?
You're correct. It was Steve Dahl and Gary Meyer.
Yeah.
It was Jonathan Brandmeier, Johnny B. Yep. It became Kevin Matthews. Brought in Danny Bonaducci. We had sports with a guy named Chet Kopic.
That's right.
Actually, as we sit here now, one of the projects, my passion projects I've been working on with some people for 4 years, is a documentary on The Loop in Chicago in the 80s.
Hey, that's worth doing. I'll tell you what. So I grew up in Chicagoland, and I was not very well traveled growing up. I think I went to Wisconsin twice, but and then as I started moving around the country in my athletic career and my business career, I would see, I'm like, why are there so many Cubs fans? Right. And WGN, WLS, The Loop, people all over the country knew about these people and consumed the content on these stations. And I don't know if it was because it was syndicated programming and you did a great job selling it out or whatever. But yeah, I was really kind of proud actually when I would, be able to, pull that stuff up. We identified with it. It's what we grew up listening to. We didn't have a lot of options. So that was it. And whatever Steve Dahl was doing, we talked about in school. So yeah, that must have been really something. And you must have done a heck of a job with that team to really develop that content and distribute it in the way that you did.
Well, look, the documentary starts in '79 when there was a radio promotion with Steve and Gary at the White Sox game. It was a doubleheader that they decided they didn't like disco, and it was
that's right.
They had a disco demolition event that
death to disco, death to disco.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's kind of starts the timeline of our documentary, but Disco Demolition's been featured in many documentaries lately. Just the Bee Gees. There was one on that alone. There's a little controversy whether it was a racial homophobic event or was just a promotion that went bad. That they used too much dynamite and the records. People brought their record to get in the game free, and then they got blown up, and there was chaos. But
that's right. Yeah, so for people that don't know, they if you brought an album, a disco album, they were going to explode it. They were in the middle of the field, right?
Yeah, and they like I said, used too much dynamite. Records flew everywhere. There was chaos. Police, authorities, fire trucks, and they had to cancel the second
shards
game.
Of vinyl and children.
Yeah. Good old baseball game.
Well, you know what they say, there's no such thing as bad publicity.
Well, that was really what happened. And then the lead guy at the Loop, Jim DeCastro, brought Steve and Gary over to the Loop because they got fired from their station. And, then Brandmeier, and what happened, the rock and roll great station known as the Loop started playing less music and more talk. And these guys became so popular as a cool, hip water cooler that we became a bit of a phenomenon too. We brought Howard Stern here. It didn't work out. That's, because there was an audience expectation of what they wanted in Chicago. So I think it'll be a fun show. I think we're going to call it Turn It Up, how Chicago's Loop changed the face of radio. It was about a 17-year run. And excited about it. But it's also about Chicago in the 80s, the Cubs, Chicago 85 Bears, maybe the greatest NFL team ever. You have Oprah. Brandmeier became a giant phenomenon. Our other guys. I mean, it was an interesting time here.
Was Jerry Springer there?
Jerry Springer is another pivot point in my career.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, after 10 years of this radio role, and we grew to 430 stations. Evergreen went public, became Clinton deregulated radio, and we just got big. We sold the Clear Channel. But at that point, I get a call from an old mentor, Mr. Swanson, who had migrated to NBC after a lot of years, and he's in 30 Rock. And he goes, "Kid, some idiot put Jerry Springer on the late news in Chicago, and all the anchors quit. And it's real crazy." I go, "I saw that, Dennis." And he said, "Well, they want to know who could fix it." And I said, "Either me or you." And he goes, "I'm not going. I already did that there. It's your turn." And he didn't even give me a choice, but I owed him so much. That's how I joined NBC in 1998, running the station in Chicago. And that was 15 years after that. But it was all over Jerry Springer, and who, by the way, rest in peace. I adored him. Great guy. We lost him last year. He a very interesting, smart guy. He made more fun of his show than anyone. But I did have to fire him when I got there. I took his show off the air, and it went to Fox. But I had to keep him in the building as his landlord because we needed the revenue, and it all worked out.
Nice.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's no problem. So, Larry, you've had this incredible career. And when we met, we were talking about current business, current opportunities. What kind of stuff are you working on today?
Yeah, this I did have 40 interesting years and great people that guided me, and then all this change. I got to witness it and participate in it. My last, I call it part of my grown-up career. I ran Tribune Media, which was a Chicago-based giant media company. Most people, even here, see it as a newspaper, but they owned television stations in 12 of the top 20 markets, the big ones in LA and New York and Chicago, super stations like WGN and WPIX and KTLA in Los Angeles. And when I went there, the company had gone bankrupt. They owned the Cubs. They sold them. It was, unfortunately, the company acquired the LA Times in the 2000s, and then something came along. A third of all the revenue in newspapers were classified ads. And Craigslist showed up. They lost a third of their revenue, and Tribune at the time overpaid for the LA Times, and it bankrupted the company. The people who bought the debt brought it back, and I got recruited to come in post-bankruptcy, and the decision was to make two companies, newspaper and then broadcasting, and double down on broadcasting. So we did that, and we became the nation's largest local television group. And then President Trump did some deregulation, and that Obama eventually undid. But we were able to sell our company in 2019 to a company called, maybe 2018, called Nexstar, a Dallas-based media company. They're the largest now in the country, about 72% of the country's TV stations. And for the first time in my career, I tried to just take a breath and say, okay, now I don't, what am I going to do? I don't want a boss for once, or a board of directors. And I always was kind of a frustrated entrepreneur in some ways. And I tell people now that in this last 4 years, I kind of screwed up retirement. I really messed it up because I got over involved in too many things. So that's how I got to this chapter now. And I'm doing, I'm doing several things. I'm running a home healthcare company, which is Chicago and Indiana based.
Is it medical or non-medical?
Yeah, well, it's for post-acute care at home. Okay. So people have orthopedic surgeries, or they need wound care, whatever they might need. We follow them home and give them, clinicians and nurses to take care of them. And we generally bill, their insurance providers or Medicare or Medicaid, whatever it might be. Interesting business. And then I'm also running a food and beverage company for a company called Jackson and Partners that got, plant-based food has gone through an interesting iteration, and they were focused on it. And so I joined. My partner's a bit notable. His name's Bo Jackson. He was a fairly good athlete.
I've heard of him. Yeah,
and but he's also a food guy, and so we've pivoted a little bit. We still sell plant-based items, and we still sell Bo burgers, great hamburgers. But we comprised and designed a hydration product last year, 17 months ago, and we just launched it two weeks ago.
Oh, congratulations!
Thank you. That was a first, from beginning to end, conception through, regulatory approvals, to, execution and manufacturing, and then learning how to get it up on the world's biggest store, Amazon, and our website, creating a website.
So is the Bo burger competitive with the Impossible and the Beyond Meats?
It's not. We're actually true Angus beef.
Okay.
But we have some other products that are plant-based. We have different shreds and chicken, plant-based chicken items, and we have some jerky. So some small meals. But Bo's just a great guy, and he loves this project because there's so much. This is a big new category. Energy drinks are and were, but hydration, 75% of Americans are dehydrated, and when we learned, the big dog in the category liquid IV had so much sugar, we started thinking, what else could we put together?
Right.
And we learned with our partner, Carry International, that there are a couple ingredients out there that no one were using yet, kind of new in terms of their efficacy and clinical findings. One's called Caprose, and it stimulates blood flow, so cardio support. And one's called IUFlex, and it naturally lubricates joints. And we said, well, what if we put, those two ingredients with the right amount of hydration, no sugar? And I'm thinking of these three things and came up with Bo 3.0. And it's, you go to bo3po.com. You can look it up on Amazon, but we love the product. 3 flavors right now, no sugar. We added some wellness with vitamin C and zinc and potassium, and we're excited about it. So,
well, I tell you, so I'm an early stage investor in Impossible Foods.
Yeah.
We've done well. And, we've still got a long way to go there with that product, but, it has good distribution and it competes well with the Beyond Meats. And then one of our I've had 2 guests on that really hit this food thing. I had a DNA expert on called Kashif Khan, Cash Khan, and he's a DNA expert, and he really talks about how your foods are so critically important. If you get your DNA testing right, think about this. You have a family of 5. You all have slightly different DNA makeup that you shouldn't eat certain things. You might, if you eat certain things and you don't clear certain amino acids, that you're going to be more susceptible to Alzheimer's or dementia or these other types of things. But if you don't eat those foods or you take this supplement, you can head those off. So that's one of our more popular episodes. And then another one, we had Andrew Zimmern from Impossible Foods, and it was all about foods and food scarcity and the stuff like that. So we kind of have a celebrity chef / DNA health, track running here on the home front. And I'd love to have Bo on to talk about Bo 3.0 if we could make that happen.
Yeah, we definitely can make it happen. He's getting busy again. This is the start of the baseball season, so he's going to go to some training camps. But we'll definitely make it happen.
All right. Again, well, we got to get him before deer season, because I think he's he goes into the woods, doesn't he?
All the time. Every day around his house, it's either squirrel or woodpecker season too. So he's a hunter. We're excited about this. We'll definitely. He's a much more fascinating hero interview than I am. So we'll set that up.
I don't know. This has been pretty fun.
Thanks. So that's all the food and beverage, and I've got 2 spirits businesses I'm involved in.
Okay.
One is a whiskey that interesting day today, because our CEO was on the talk yesterday and announced a book that's coming out. But it all started 6 years ago when she showed me a picture from the Wall Street Journal of Jack Daniels and about 80 people with them, guys. And then she pointed to one black face, and she goes, "Who's that?" I said, She goes, "Nobody knows." She goes, "But I've been researching it for a year, and his name's Nathan Green, and he taught Jack Daniels how to make whiskey." So I think he was the nation's first black master distiller, and he came up with this process called the Lincoln County system with maple. So anyway, she wanted to make a movie, and then the family that she researched said you should do a whiskey in his honor. Anyway, it is now the nation's most awarded, fastest growing whiskey for 4 years, and it's right now globally becoming that. And it's the distillery in Lynchburg, Tennessee, Shelbyville, exactly where it is, near Jack Daniels, is the 7th most visited distillery in the world. And she just announced a book. It's a real exciting project, Uncle Nearest Whiskey.
Uncle Nearest. Okay.
Yeah. I should have brought some props, but
that's a little early. But
no, it's Friday in Chicago. We doze but never close when it's happy hour. And then we launched a tequila a few years back. First a seltzer, organic, called Freshie, very clean. But then the new tequila is called Authentico, same distillery in Mexico. And we have no additives and it's fully organic, USDA supported. And there's thousands of tequilas out there, but we think ours is in the cleaner, affordable space, and we're excited about it. So like I said, Jeff, I did not retire well. I maybe over, amped my next chapter, but that's why it was so great to meet you and learn a little bit about all you've done and continue to do, even with your scratching your curiosity niche like this with your audiences. I think it's pretty cool.
Well, look, we can't leave. I got asked that question last week. I was leading some roundtables out in Phoenix for our industry association, and why don't you just walk away? Why don't I sold my main company when I was 50, and it's like, why would you want to leave with everything that you've learned? Why would you want to stop meeting new great people, solving problems? Business is full contact. It's a sport.
Yeah.
And, it's like, if you want to fish or you want to hunt or you want to golf and you want to do church stuff or you want to volunteer at the hospital, I think all that stuff's great if you want to do it. But, for me and started building businesses when I was 19 years old, then, I don't know anything else. And I don't know another way to contribute.
Well, admirable, and I've already raised my hand to you offline to tap into some of your expertise on franchising, because there's another business I'm newly involved in as well. So
yeah, we'd love to do it. We'd love to do it. Can I media today?
Yeah.
Carefully wading into the topic. It's gotten very. It's gotten interesting. There's a lot of impact. There's a lot of influence. Oh, both 3.0. Got the hat on. Awesome.
He killed me. I mean, I don't want him to get mad at me. You didn't even promote it. Well, come on, bro. We got a pack of 15 right here. Your 3 flavors. So
awesome.
Right.
What perspective can you provide for somebody like me who, I don't know where to get my news anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't know, how to filter it. It used to be, I'd watch 60 Minutes. I'd take it at face value. I'd watch, public broadcasting. I'd watch the documentaries. I really, growing up, it was like, this is where I get my news and this is where I get my truth. Right. This is where I get my education, my information. This is how I broaden how I think about things. And advertising has gotten so pervasive and, influence and special interests inside of that. It's really hard to understand, not be suspicious of everything that I listen to.
Boy, is that a tough question, because like you said, there's 24 hours a day. There's just so much out there. Right. And so I don't think there's a magic formula. I think that question and that struggle exists for everybody. And depending on, your tribal environment, who you hang with and who you live
Right.
with, and, which is a big influence, you have to surf and trust. You have to decide. And I spent a lot of days on panels defending local news, because I learned in the 90s when I was at NBC. It's funny, we were struggling with MSNBC, the channel. It was actually losing a lot of money. People probably don't know that MS in MSNBC stands for Microsoft. And they had made a 99-year deal with Microsoft. And I remember Steve Ballmer pounding a table, being so angry at how badly the channel was doing. And NBC was so focused on doing a, objective down the middle, news channel. And, but they were losing to Fox, which had now been 6-7 years underway. And so I know people are rolling their eyes that I said a network was trying to be objective with a news channel, but I believe that was always the goal for true journalists. What happened was made clear, and what I've learned is love and hate get higher ratings than like and dislike. So what does that mean? Well, Fox and Rupert Murdoch picked a lane. Yeah. Right? Because there's more love and hate over there. And then, so finally, I'm in a big room at 30 Rock, and someone's, well, why don't we pick the other lane? And there was a whole lot of, we can't do that. And then someone finally said, well, we better. And
Look,
so
if you're not living on the edge, you're just taking up space. I mean,
yeah,
if
right.
people vanilla content, right? I mean, if we're not on this podcast educating, entertaining, or inspiring, then nobody's coming back.
You're exactly right. And so, look, is there a place or a role for, call it, completely objective news? I used to make the case for local media, although stations in local markets are a little bit indigenous to wherever they are, right? We know that they're red, purple, blue states and everything in between, right? So, but I think they strive to do that. When I was at Tribune, we did 82,000 hours a year of local news. And I can promise you that with news director meetings and daily, check-ins, that was our goal. Consumers don't believe that anymore because they're just pounded with what really is editorial, right?
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah,
it's editorial. Well, so like observationally, there's two real drivers here. Number one is the dollars. Like, what's going to get the clicks and the eyeballs to be able to make sure that the station or the outlet makes money? Right. And then number two is there's people behind all of it. So if people, like to your point, you got to pick a side, you got to pick a lane, everybody gets in their echo chamber. So now people that are actually at the point of it, and we've seen it go bad with some of these big companies where they maybe they throw a commercial out there that didn't land the way they wanted it to.
Right.
And they upset, part of their base. And so now they've got to come back the other way. But somebody made the decision to say, this resonates with me. It's going to resonate with other people like me. And it should resonate with everybody because in my echo chamber, I'm right. Now, answer me this, though. This is my question. Have you seen those little internet videos where they clip like 25 different local news stations together and they're saying exactly the same phrase, exactly the same way, with exactly the same buzzword? How does that happen?
I have seen some of those montages.
Yes.
And I think a lot of that has to do with the edit room. I do. Again, I manage 42 stations and I watch them a lot. So I think you can. We give them enough capability to make that right, but there's also some liberty taken in the edit room. So it's a combination.
Well, look. So like we, on a fitness thing, right? A fitness franchise. Yeah. We put the workouts in. And then every franchise delivers the same workout. So to your point earlier, if the Tribune Media owns 42 different stations, and it only makes sense to centralize the production of content, and then it just gets put out there so everybody's reading the same teleprompter. It's really not collusion. It's just business efficiency. Is that fair?
There's some centralization and standardization and economy of scale, right?
Right.
To do that, like you acknowledged. But at the same time, again, I go back to each market has its own, indigenous environment, and you have to customize for them. McDonald's looks different in China than it does in your market, right?
Sure.
Sometimes, and the menus are a little different,
right?
But, I think that's true about local TV. But boy, we sure look bad when someone does, homogenizes an edit like that.
Well, anybody who doesn't realize that news, I've done a lot of news, and what I realized is these people are so incredible at reading what's in front of them. They have no input. They're not. Yeah. I mean, they're just reading like the teleprompter's going. They're reading the script. It sounds conversational. They deliver it so well, and they don't have to prep at all. I mean, I'm standing in the back with some of these people that are getting ready to go on. They're not reading anything. They just plop up there and, they read the content. They deliver the news like they're supposed to. So there's
they rarely write it. They rarely research it. And then mistakes are made on both sides. Mistakes are made on the content creation and the edit. And then sometimes things are misread. And then if you clip those things, right? Because it's live. It's live. It's local news is live. National network news is live. And so, stuff happens. And if you edit all the the blips and it can be entertaining.
It can be. It can be. So any vision into where the opportunities are in media over the next 5 to 10 years? Is there any trends that you see that maybe the rest of us aren't aware of yet?
I still believe that personality matters. I always have. I mean, that's what made this Loop experience so unique, because we assembled some unique, great, albeit different, but aligned personalities all in one place. So whenever you hit the button, you knew you were going to have some escapism and some entertainment that was all improv, right? Nothing was scripted. But these news cable shows, those are personality driven. Talk shows, most of them fail. Personality driven. Sports shows, when you have an athlete, they have a personality, they really stick out, don't they?
Absolutely.
I mean, when they have both, right? I just think there's value to talent and personality, and but like I said, it is the fragmented universe of consumption is. I think it's going to continue, and so we have so many channels and platforms we can consume from. The net result is more overall consumption growing up, believe it or not. But there's only so many hours in a day, so the only thing that can ultimately drive that is population. And, people really, they still watch a small number of channels even with all this choice. I mean,
Right.
So how do you become, the choice, right? How do you resonate, stand out? But look at podcasting didn't really exist. I would say, 15 years ago per se. I mean, it was possible, but it became, once it became clear that content didn't have to be live, and people were becoming more accustomed to programming to themselves when they want, where they want, right? All of a sudden, this podcast platform became because the barrier to entry is pretty low.
Yeah.
Now, what have we learned? There's new ones every day, right? But there's a small percentage of them that get some sort of a scale and some sort of a targeting to that scale. And so it's really what you deliver, and then who you recruit to be your loyal fanship. I mean, this. We're all striving to create a connection and garner a loyalty, because that's the great business model. And of course, scale is relative. They don't all have, it's not just the numbers, qualitative and quantitative together on matter. But it's still looking down the road a little bit. The interesting part to me is, how do you monetize things so you can support them so they can survive? And those models keep changing. I'm in the spirits business, and it used to be a couple consolidated big distributors. And then you realize they have so much they can't care, right, about a brand. So then you fall back and you find, some boutique passionate ones, all in this environment, a way to cut through. In media, the model's moving from advertising to subscription, right? So you either get people to decide that they're going to pay a daily, monthly, a la carte fee to consume, or you put advertising in front of them, or both. But there's been a big shift towards some sort of a subscription model. And of course, free content is just trying to get enough scale to then monetize it later.
Well, that's true. And I'll say the ones that you're willing to pay for are the ones that are farther out on the edge. The ones that really serve your echo chamber and the stuff that you want to hear more of. You're willing to pay anything to be able to be, served what it is that you like, and to reinforce some of the positions that you have. You don't see a lot of the, you don't see a lot of the really clearly objective stuff monetizing out there. And there is so much free content out there. You really don't have to pay for anything to be able to get 10 or 15 minute snippets of the stuff that's behind the paywall anyway. They're just teasers, but there's a lot of it there. So Well, hey,
It's an
Larry,
interesting, yeah,
no, go ahead. Go ahead. I was just
say
going
an
to,
interesting, phenomenon that's going on is there's so much choice that people are starting to sign up for and subscribe to things that they can never get to and consume, right? And so
right.
now some businesses, they count on that part of the model.
Yeah.
I'm involved with a company called restaurant.com that just merged with a company called Card Cash. And that's a lot about, getting, aggregating uh, cards that you've earned a balance on one way or another, points are a balance, and people don't use them all. So Card Cash actually brings value to those, and there's an aftermarket for those cards. And everyone eats and goes out to eat, so it's a great partnership with Restaurant.com, and we're very excited about for the consumers, helping them monetize those type of benefit cards, those type of loyalty clubs, along with having local restaurant choice and the ability to connect all of that.
Yeah, I'm familiar with those two companies, and we've participated, I think, in some fundraisers using some of those things. Larry, I want to be respectful of your time. I know you got to jump and get on the road, so we're going to get you out of here on time. Last question for you. If you had one sentence to speak into somebody else's life, what would that be?
I guess it's what's on my mind, but just prioritize your time. Your time. I mean, I don't want to cliche, but obviously health and family and all of those things. But your time and how you use it is the number one currency you might have, because it's finite. it comes and goes. So I try to get the most I can out of every day. I could tell you do. I hope people realize what an opportunity it is to have the ability to maximize time. Maybe too I don't know, generic and lofty, but at the same time. But
interesting, incredible truth. I heard last week that 18 minutes a day is 100 hours a year. So think about how many things do you do that waste 18 minutes a day, where you could develop 100 hours of a skill? You could in 18 minutes a day, you can learn to speak a foreign language. You can write code. You can develop a business model. You can write a book in 100 hours. You actually, like with the tools you've got today, there's so many things that you can do, but, and then you burn, 2 hours on TikTok first thing in the morning. Right. So it's very sage, and there's so many distractions on our time and our attention now. I think it's harder and harder to sort that.
They say, I've read that if in 100 hours you can learn any skill and be, pretty adept at it. So think about that. That's a great, interesting, factoid.
Yeah, 100%. Larry Wert, this has been amazing. How can people get in touch with you if they wanted to?
Yeah, I'm pretty accessible. I'll put out an email. It's just my initials, ljw@larrywert.com. To a fault, I get back to people. I'll do my best, but again, that time management thing's a son of a gun. But yeah, thanks for having me on. Great to see you again, and look forward to more learnings with you together.
Yeah, 100%, and that's Larry Wert. Is how he spells it. So thank you, Larry Wert, for being on the home front today with Jeff Duden, and thank you everybody out there for listening.